Hello and welcome to Glasgow Doors Open Day's Digital Festival. This event will begin soon, but first we have a brief housekeeping message. So that you can get the most out of this session, we'd like to point out a few features of Zoom. By clicking on the buttons at the bottom of the Zoom window, you will be able to access the chat room, and if you are in a webinar, you will also be able to make use of the Q&A function. The Q&A function is so that you can ask specific questions of the speaker, which they will be able to answer time allowing at the end of the session. Use the chat room to contribute more generally to the discussion or to share links and resources. When using these features, please mind your P's and Q's. Both will be monitored and recorded. Most sessions will be recorded and uploaded to Glasgow Doors Open Days Festival YouTube channel and website. If you're in a meeting, please make sure you keep your microphone on mute unless otherwise directed by the host. If for some reason the session ends unexpectedly or you lose connection, please just click the link again and wait to be let back in. Similarly, if the host loses connection, please bear with us. We will do our best to manage any connection issues as and when they occur, and may contact you by email if necessary. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear about your experience of our digital festival. Fill in our survey to be in with a chance of winning a £100 voucher for a Glasgow local business of your choice. Our survey is available at www.glasgowdoorsopendays.org.uk/survey. Thanks to our supporters, the Arlington Bass Club, Glasgow City Council and the many more, which you can find out about on the partners page of our website. We hope you enjoy this event. Hello and welcome to Glasgow Doors Open Days Festival. My name is Stephen Sheriff. I'm the festival coordinator. Welcome to day 5. We've had a fantastic range of digital events happening over the last 5 days. And tomorrow and Sunday, we're very excited to be getting back into buildings. If you are planning to join us tomorrow and over the weekend, you can have a look on our website and see that there's a whole range of buildings that are open without a booking necessary. So don't let the fact that lots of the buildings are booked up already put you off. There's certainly lots for everyone to see. I'm now very glad to introduce Phil Zobauer, the president of the Glasgow Institute of Architects, to get this evening's event kicked off. Thank you.
Here, thanks for that, Stephen. Hi, everybody. Welcome along to our second night of Behind the Prize. My name is Phil Zobauer. I'm president of the Glasgow Institute of Architects, and just wanted to thank you all for making the time to come along on this Friday evening. Also, just massive thanks to Doors Open Days again for hosting us. This is, I think, the 3rd year that we're doing Behind the Prize. And for those of you who don't really know what the GIA is, the Glasgow Institute of Architects, we're one of the chapters of the Royal Incorporation of Architects in Scotland. The RIS is made up of 6 chapters, of which we're actually the largest with over 1,500 members. And we do various events and CPDs throughout the course of the year, as well as competitions, and we organise both the GIA's Design Awards, for which submissions close a week today, next Friday, and we also do the GIA Student Awards. The Student Awards recognise the very best of the work that's been produced by the students at both the Macintosh School of Architecture and Strathclyde. And we created this platform Behind the Prize basically as an opportunity for the students to showcase their hard work and to celebrate their work. And I think it's particularly important that we do that now in the world of COVID, particularly when we're not able to have physical degree shows. And we think it's really important that students have got a platform for which they can get a chance to speak about their work and present to prospective employers. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Massimo on our Education Committee to get us underway. But thanks again for joining us, and hope you enjoy the wonderful work that's been produced by the students this year. Cheers, thanks.
Thanks, Phil. So hi everyone, welcome to the second and final night of this year's Behind the Prize. Thanks everyone for coming. Got a brilliant number of speakers tonight, so I hope you enjoy it. The way we're going to run the night tonight is have a student present their project, then have a couple questions when they're done. Please don't hesitate to submit your questions in the chat box, and I'll read them out after. The event is really centered on helping you, the students, and creating a discussion on people's projects. So it's a real plus having you guys involved, and yeah, please ask away. Without further ado, we'll start with a great project by Glasgow School of Art's fifth year, Gabriella Tony.
Hi, thank you. Thanks to the GIA for inviting me tonight and for Glasgow Doors Open Festival. I'm just gonna share my screen. You'll probably hear that sentence a lot tonight. Okay, so this was my fifth year diploma project and it was titled Manifesto for Scarcity and Abundance. For me, this really started from my previous education, my interest in architecture in the context of the climate crisis. But then I progressed the research and I started the year looking a lot and reading a lot about the design of scarcity. So the idea that the situation that we're in is manufactured and designed. This is a ghost map of vulnerability. And what I wanted to understand was the fact that climate is a global common, it's a global phenomena. Here in the west of Scotland, we have a really specific climate. And this is due to, it's formed at the equator, where the global weather cells travel north, hit the highlands, and result in a phenomenon known as relief rainfall, which means that there is almost heavy rain all year round. And the ghost map is resized to show the impacts of climate change throughout the world. And for me, again, this really highlighted the fact that, is it fair that some of the nations are contributing to most of the causes of climate change, at least likely to suffer its effects? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so as I mentioned, my research was wanting to understand the impacts of water, the relationship of water here in the west of Scotland, but also getting down to detail level of how water is used here. But fundamentally, the technical investigation was really important and part of this project from the beginning. Water scarcity is estimated by the UN to lead to the displacement of 700 million people by 2030. There are many countries around the world who already suffer the extremes of water scarcity. This is an image of, in India, of water tankers delivering water to residents because quite often water supplies have been used, aquifers have been used up, and rain cannot be relied upon anymore to provide drinking water. And then we contrast this with the culture here in Scotland, the fact that historically the infrastructure around water has helped to shape cities. It has changed the way that we live, the health of Glasgow especially, and water here is provided free of charge, which is unlike many places around the world. And this infrastructure has scarred the landscape, and there is a contrast between what this has done to the nature of Scotland, but also how it affects the city. So specifically, my research really looked at water from the sky to the ground to the highlands, the relationship of that area to Glasgow, the impact that had on population health in the 19th century, urban development. I looked at Paris as a case study comparison. And then within Glasgow, the area that my project centered around as a testing bed was Port Dundas in the north of the city. This is a post-industrial area, I'm sure many of you know it, adjacent to the Forth and Clyde Canal. And most importantly, the topography for me represented the systems that have traditionally been used to power water using gravity, and it provided a unique opportunity to do this. The Forth and Clyde as it was in the 1950s. So then kind of through that research portion of the development of the thesis, I created 3 aims, and fundamentally of which the project was to be situated in a speculative future, and it aimed to spark debate. So it's understanding what would happen if water as a resource became so valuable that it could be speculated upon in a global market, like oil already is, and asking us to imagine how this could, what would this look like if we carried on in the direction that we're going in today? And fundamentally, the master plan situated the scheme from the global context to the highlands, to Loch Katrine, to the area at Dundas Hill, where water would be processed and intaked, to a composed building within a landscape, and then finally overlooking the Forth and Clyde and the city below. And imagining what would it be like to export this water? What would it be like to ship it around, like already happens in many nations around the world? And as I mentioned before, the topography was crucial to this. And really the aim was to generate a holistic strategy that dealt with water in the wetland landscape, in the building itself, in the canal, with a local microhydro development also helping to power back the site and connect back to the grid, again referencing the kind of whole of the infrastructure. And this was an early sketch of what I imagine the wetland landscape to be like, and to act as an emergency buffer in situations of extreme weather, but also for sustainable urban drainage. So the plan of the building itself starts at ground within this landscape at the top of the hill, overlooking the city on an axis that tries to reconnect to the reservoirs below. 2 concrete tanks act as the primary structural support, and there's a light volume around it that aims to play on this idea of water as an economic resource and almost create a central hall and banking chamber with associated facilities above. And then crucially in section, like I mentioned, the structure aimed to reimagine the amount of use of concrete that's normally used in these buildings to do with water. And the tanks act as part of the processing, but also the structural design. And so the way that people interact with the scheme as well was reimagined with some components, trying to think about the journey of water around the building and its processing, but also how that could be deposited and counted. And structurally, the resolution, the structural design aimed to resolve the journey of water from the roof to the ground, every component acting as part of the scheme to deal with water holistically. And finally, the detail design, resulted in 3 components: one set in the landscape, one part of the facade and a louvered facade as part of the environmental strategy, and also a rain gauge and a kind of detailed central feature to deal with water. That's all. Thank you very much.
Oh, that was great, Gabriella. Thanks for starting us off with that project. It's so interesting. Yeah, if anyone wants to send in a question, yeah, don't hesitate, and I'll read it out to Gabriella. I don't mind just kicking things off though.
Yeah.
I thought this project was so interesting because I think it's kind of playing to this kind of dark side of a brief of being like, how do you just make use of this thing that like the world is going to be in so much need of, which is a different take for a uni project, and like I thought was really good. And yeah, some of the like your industrial drawings that I think you've kind of worked out the machinery just looks so great.
Thank you, that's kind.
Yeah. Did you think of anything else about how like water could be used as like more of a kind of communal activity as well? Like throughout the project, it's like I think you've handled the technical stuff really well. Is there anything that you can highlight of the kind of human touch to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have liked to expand more of the area around the canal, and I looked a lot in my research at how, in the situation that is now, how the nodes across the Forth and Clyde really act as, all the neighbourhoods, and that's kind of a connective link. I think in this instance, the main way that people engage with it is in a kind of scary way. Again, in this scenario that I was imagining and hoping will never happen. So yeah, and that's kind of what led me to think about more of the design of components. And then actually the journey, so the louver facade and the journey around the building was thought about as well. And I really wanted to maximize the kind of the volume on the hill with respect to the city. And this culminated with a garden. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but on the top floor, it's kind of a viewing area in a hydroponic garden that also tries to reference the way that many banking buildings provide sky gardens as the public offering And I kind of wanted to play on that idea a little bit as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. Yeah, those sky gardens that like you have to pay 20 quid to get into.
Yeah. So I think it was it was trying to be a bit sparky, I think, and comment on a situation that I really hope will never happen.
Yeah. I thought it was good. You actually you mentioned how the infrastructure's like scarred the landscape, which is actually something when you go on walks around reservoirs not far from Glasgow and you think, oh, this is just actually a nice walk, but it's funny, you actually see it as something different than it is almost like a motorway cutting through the landscape. It's the same type of idea, but just a different service. Yeah, so it's kind of good that your building like reflects that as being this kind of quite massive industrial thing that like has an impact. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really unique. It feels to me there's something that's really unique to my experience of Scotland. And I thought it was something really interesting that I wanted to play on. And I was really interested in that at the beginning of the year through the research component and kind of understanding that all the technical way that water arrives to the city, how it's connected between the locks and working out volumes of water and stuff like that. Yeah.
So I was having a wee bit of
that's okay.
Wi-Fi issues. Yeah, if you can still hear me though, that's absolutely great. What a way to kick us off, Gabriella. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're going to move on next to Strathclyde's 5th year. And we have Tia. If you don't mind sharing your screen, please.
Yep, just a sec. Okay. So full screen now. Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Tia from the University of Strathclyde, and I'll be presenting my master's thesis project, which I've called the Cloud Cooperative. So I spent my first semester this year writing a research document on the concept of surveillance capitalism, which is a term used to describe a new type of market economy. So essentially, surveillance capitalism is the extraction of human experience for the profit of others. By accepting terms and conditions in the internet, we're giving companies the right to know our location, friends, search history, and viewing preferences. And this information is then sold to advertisers who use it to modify our behavior and to make us buy more stuff, basically. And at the end of my research, I proposed a sort of data revolution where users would take back control of their private data. And in this new system, companies would be held accountable for breaches in privacy, and the infrastructure of the internet would become decentralized. So even though the internet is made to seem like something spaceless, it does exist on some very physical infrastructure. It's made up of fiber optic cables, internet service providers, and these massive energy intensive data centers, which is the typology that I was focusing on with this project. Most of this infrastructure is owned by giant tech corporations like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. And this centralization has led to violations of our online rights. So in order to combat the current monopoly on data, this project proposed the creation of a new, more ethical version of the cloud, one that prioritizes users over corporations. So the project is also proposing a hybrid internet, which would combine a peer-to-peer network with a large-scale centralized data storage. And these centralized elements would be hosted in city-specific data grounds, which would store large amounts of data, compute data overflow, and connect the city to the rest of the world via broadband and satellites. And I chose Edinburgh as the site of the pilot project because of the city's grand plans to become the next data capital of Europe, with the Scottish government investing in data science education and tech startups. And the pilot project is located on Cramond Island, which is an island just off the coast of Edinburgh. And the island is already a popular tourist destination and is home to quite a few World War II bunkers, which were a large influence on the design. And the island will be home to 4 buildings, which will make up the first data grounds. Each structure has a different purpose, with some providing an educational experience and a symbolic link to data, some generating big data research, and others dedicated to the storage and management of data. Every building would be designed to blend in with the landscape, inviting visitors to investigate the island and discover the buildings with interactive elements. Visitors are able to climb on roofs, look in through courtyards and windows, or see servers beneath them when they swim. The first building I'll talk about is the outdoor baths, which are heated by the island's main server farm. And the server farm is cut into the side of the island, and the excess heat produced by these servers is used to heat the pool complex surrounding it, meaning that visitors can enjoy outdoor bathing all year round while also experiencing a very physical connection to their private clouds. The rest of this excess heated water travels to Edinburgh, where it connects to the district heating scheme. The cooled water then returns to the island, where it once again helps regulate the temperature of the servers. So it sort of creates a feedback loop, and also ties in with the district heating scheme that Edinburgh is now proposing. The second building is a research centre for big data. The island's research centre is based on Glasgow's Urban Big Data Centre, which uses data generated as a byproduct of sensors, apps, and websites to produce highly accurate research. The centre will also have office space for data analysts, cybersecurity experts, and will be able to host tech startup companies. The building is made up of a series of courtyards, topped with sculptural roof lights, and these roof lights serve a dual purpose of both letting light into the underground plan, while also providing visitors with an opportunity to sort of peek into the inner workings of a data research centre. The third element of the cooperative are these floating data rigs, which are used to maintain an underwater server farm. This basically means submerging servers inside waterproof tanks into the Firth of Forth, where they're passively cooled by the cold water. These tanks are moved and maintained by floating platforms with 4 towers, each with a mechanical winch at the top. And each of these towers is a repurposed oil derrick, and the structure floats on top of a repurposed oil FPS platform. And the final building is meant to future-proof the island and act as the final form of data storage. It uses a new technology called 5D optical data storage, where lasers engrave blocks of quartz glass with each groove representing a different piece of information. The design is based on the idea of an entire archive of these glass blocks, with each block capable of holding an entire lifetime of data inside of it. And the only electricity needed would be for the laser robots, which can move about the archive, engraving and reading the information on these glass blocks. And as this project is set in the historic city of Edinburgh and its surrounding natural landscape, I thought it was important to try and reach a balance between creating visual markers of the city becoming the new data capital and respecting the existing fabric of the city. So the biggest visual markers would be the floating data rigs on the Firth of Forth, and they would be the first thing that people see when they arrive into Edinburgh by plane or by boat. And in order to expand the reach of the peer-to-peer network and the centralized network into the city centre, the project proposes attaching small-scale cell towers to the tops of Edinburgh's many church steeples and spires. And one of the main forces driving the design of all 4 structures was materiality. As a rapidly developing industry, data technologies have a tendency to become obsolete within tens of years. I wanted to acknowledge this by making the materiality of the buildings sort of transient, in the sense that they would visibly decay over time, showing signs of age and being overgrown by plants like moss and ivy. So what happens after the pilot project in Edinburgh? The plan would be for this cloud cooperative to go global and for data grounds to be established in cities all over the world. And the cloud cooperative imagines a new internet connected by citywide peer-to-peer networks, city-to-city data grounds, and worldwide satellites. An internet that is sustainable, transparent, and democratic. Thank you.
Oh, wow, that was also so good, Tia. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Can you mind just keeping your screen shared?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Show some of those nice images. Yeah, if anybody wants to submit a question, yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, give that a couple minutes, but yeah, otherwise I'll go ahead as well. I thought I really wanted to put yours just after Gabriella's, just to show like how normally when we think of architecture projects, they kind of shy away a little bit from this like approach in industry. And I thought it was so interesting that 2 5th years that from both schools were kind of on the same track and try to tackle issues like that. I thought it was like, yeah, really interesting. And I thought also, like, I think if you can go back through a couple renders,
yeah,
there's one where it's kind of like rainy and you're looking at those robots you said.
Oh yeah, this one.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, in the same way that like Gabriella's wants to be this kind of baddie almost. I get this feeling of like kind of looking at Blade Runner here. Thought the visuals were like really, really successful, and maybe not being as much of a baddie, but having that kind of dystopian feeling. Yeah. That's something that you were looking at.
Yeah, I guess it was just like, how do you take something that could easily become dystopian with like the way data centers look right now, as in like no windows, security cameras everywhere, blocked off by fencing, and then just making it something like, okay, well, you're allowed to see what's happening in here, and you're allowed to see what they're doing with your data and whether or not they're reading it, and yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think there's like a nice sense of like transparency, like even like the screen here is kind of like that water that was coming down in the courtyard. It's quite nice little parallels. Got a question from Gabriella actually.
Okay.
She goes, the passive cooling of the servers using the water of the Firth is great. What was the influence of the World War II bunkers?
Oh yeah, so I didn't have them in here, but basically a bunch of these buildings are subterranean. So this one, for example, has everything's above you is sort of ground level, and then you're cut into the earth, and I'm using concrete, board mark concrete as well, letting moss and ivy grow on it. But yeah, basically it was like, the idea was if you go on this island and it's already a tourist destination, you don't want to ruin the natural landscape. You want to sort of do the same thing that the bunkers are doing, where they're sort of covered in grass and they're sort of blended into it. So you can be standing on top of a giant bunker and not realize it. The same way you could be giant, like standing right by this pool and looking into it and realize that there's a whole building underneath you.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it reminds me of yeah, there was like an image of like a bunker that was like cut in half as like an art.
Yeah,
yeah, get that kind of from this image. Yeah, really powerful. One wee question I had was, you were saying that like you're embracing that idea of decay, which is really interesting. But does that mean that in 10 years the whole thing is done?
Yeah. So basically, I think the most decaying part of this would be the floating structures, which are already repurposing a defunct sort of industry, which is the oil and gas mining in the seas by Scotland. And there's already sort of like a graveyard of these oil rigs up north in Scotland as well, and using that components, and then looking at how you can reuse the steel and the other components, and like using the biggest, hardest to recycle bits in these first so that they have a second lifespan, and then looking at how you can actually dismantle them after that. But basically the idea was for these pools, and then the archive, which is a classroom for like data, like bringing in school students to learn about data. Those would be sort of permanent structures that are meant to sort of be slowly overgrown but not completely covered. And that's why they use a sort of more permanent materiality as well.
Oh, great. Got another question here from Daniel. It says, what would be the materiality of this project to try to connect natural with industrial materials?
Yeah, so that was the concrete and the Corten. And then I think my first approach was just doing, like the critique I got in the beginning was like, you're not showing enough of the data. Like it looks just like a bathhouse and stuff, which is why I've punched all these openings in it. And I've got pools with glazing at the bottom showing the servers underneath. And stuff like that. So yeah, it's just like having these glazings, but also having a screening effect from water. Yeah, so trying to make it more mysterious and intriguing for people to sort of try to increase data literacy and people being interested in what their data is doing.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for that. That was such a great presentation. We're going to move on to now to who've we got? Strathclyde's first year student, Theodora Sideri. Oh wait, sorry, no, she's actually going last. Sorry, she just sent me a message. Sorry, do you mind, Jacob, do you mind if you go next? Strathclyde's year 3 student.
Yes, no problem. Let me just share my screen.
Cheers for that.
Yeah. All right, okay. Well. All right, can you see this? Hopefully you can.
Yeah, you can. Great.
Yeah, okay. Cheers. So, hello everyone. My name's Jacob Young, and I'm going to be kind of giving you a little flavour of my undergraduate thesis, which was the Merchant Theatre. So framing the problem, theatre architecture in Glasgow is primarily based around the final performance, where aspects of rehearsal, set manufacturing, and transportation is usually left to third-party operators. So the thesis looks at ways of reinventing the negatively perceived space of Glasgow's back lanes, specifically the area enclosed by Merchant Lane, Bridgegate, and Shipbank Lane, which you can see here. It looks at reforming the existing railway infrastructure, which is currently a series of tunnels and arches, which you can see in this plan. And it looks at designing a building which considers manufacturing, rehearsal, performance, and dispersion within one theatre, cutting out the expense and carbon footprint of third-party contractors. So the wider strategy reactivates the railway to create a culture network of travelling shows, a nationwide sustainable theatre model centralised within merchant hubs and transported by trains. So you can see the building here on the site, which is enclosed by Merchant Lane, which I kind of opened up and re-landscaped to make the front of the theatre, where the back of the theatre has been pushed to the railway and to Shipbank Lane. So this is where all the backstage areas are. And to the north, you've got this kind of urban park, which kind of buffers the view of St. Enoch's car park and the theatre itself. So we kind of started off with the existing mass, which was this kind of labyrinth of arches. The Brigate Clock Tower's here, just for reference. And like I said, the front is placed on Merchant Lane, the back is placed on Shipbank Lane, and then to the north, you've got this kind of transient space where you kind of look through these glazed arches, and it kind of reveals the theatrical mechanics within. I then carved out a void to reveal the arches internally, which was the main reason for doing this is just kind of freeing up the site for the spatial requirements of the theatre. And something really nice which happened was this kind of border of arches, which meant to get to the new insertion, you have to pass through the kind of old arches. So the insertion itself was this 90-degree grid, which I decided to impose within the void. And the idea was all about architectural contrast. So the kind of main drawing thing which kind of drew me to the site was the arches. And instead of just mimicking it, which I thought was quite a weak form of addressing the context, I thought, well, okay, how could I contrast it? So contrasting the new and the old and the arches with this kind of 90-degree grid. And then this grid kind of rises up and envelops the arches to kind of create all the spaces you need for the theatre. And you can see it also kind of rose up to create this crane, which is used for taking shipping containers full of kind of sets, props, and costumes to and from the railway. This public and private diagram just kind of really shows how all the public areas have been grouped and then pushed to Merchant Lane, whereas all the kind of private backstage areas are then pushed to Shipbank Lane. So if we go into the ground floor, you enter at the Merchant Lane Bridgegate intersection, so on this corner here, and you can either go south to the Cafe Bistro, which then spills out onto the kind of re-landscaped Merchant Lane, or you kind of go through the box office, which is under one of these arches, and you can kind of tell by the thicker walls. And it kind of creates this moment where you pass through the old arches to get to this kind of new lobby. And once you're in the lobby, you can then go to the kind of upper floors or the lower theatre stalls. And then you've also got this open plan rehearsal and event space. So when you're in the lobby, you can kind of look through the glazed kind of openings and watch people rehearsing. And if there's like a cultural festival going on, these kind of openings can open up and then extend the lobby for a kind of larger event space. Whereas the backstage, so you've got the kind of rehearsals in these Shipbank Lane arches, you've got the private change, costumes, prop bank, and metal wood workshops, which all have access for deliveries on Shipbank Lane. And then you've got the workshop itself, which is kind of like this well-oiled machine where you kind of have carpenters making sets, and this can be directly access to the fly tower for, say, the Glasgow debut. And then also, if you want to take this to the train platform, they can all go in this kind of giant industrial lift where you take the costumes, the props, and the sets in this, and this can then go in the shipping containers above. So if we go up a level, if we go for the lobby up here, you then have access to the kind of train platform, which is where actors will kind of get on and get off to go around different theatres around Scotland. You then have access to the upper level stalls and a merchant bar, which can be accessed on a secondary route via rooftop terrace. And this is the kind of industrial lift which I talked about before. So you take all the kind of the production of a theatre and put it in these container stores, and then the crane can take the containers and put them on the train to then travel. The second floor plan is really about the technical side. So you've got the gantry for the lighting, the fly tower for the sets, and also on the train platform, you've got the signal box, which kind of reinforces the idea of trains coming to and leaving the Merchant Theatre. This section, so you've got the kind of entrance on Merchant Lane with this kind of triple height, and it's kind of got this stepped approach. And you can see that you pass through this kind of existing arch, which you can see from this thicker floor, and then get to this double height lobby space. And from the lobby, you can access a rehearsal or the train platform above with the theatre itself. And this section could really be described as a party of the whole design. So to the north, you've got the kind of lobby and the northern terraces. In the center, you've got this kind of heart, which is the theatre itself, and it's accompanied by the gantries and the fly tower. And then behind the fly tower, you've got this kind of set workshop. And it creates this kind of spatial diagram from workshop to theatre to lobby, from private to semi-private to public. So within the north elevation, you can kind of see how the theatre attempts to marry the existing railway arches with a modular insertion. Inspired by the works of Archigram and Cedric Price, the utilitarian design proposes a standardized grid, which could be applied from city to city, activating infrastructure in neighboring streets. Whereas the east elevation is kind of all about the back, and it's all about shipback lane. And it's kind of activated through these glazed portals. So the idea is that you can be walking along and you've kind of got this this kind of show with the mechanics behind the theatre. So you can see people rehearsing, you can see the carpenters designing the sets and the props. And this is also where the kind of stage door will be. So this might be where you go get your autograph at the end of the show from the actors. So the whole idea of the theatre kind of is based around the merchant, and the site's kind of got a rich history from the Paddy's Market to being a former meat market. And I really like the idea of kind of people in the city coming together from different subcultures, sharing their knowledge to create a production. And then the idea that this production is then transported around nationwide. So kind of rethinking the centrifugal, centripetal forces of culture within Glasgow. And in this view from King Street, you can see the kind of red imposing grid over the existing arch structure. And it's inspired by Bernard Tschumi's Parc de la Villette, where the corrugated red facade extends outside the realms of context and into the dogma of the diagram. While Tschumi uses color to unify separate pavilions, Merchant Theatre uses color to construct a cultural machine greater than the sum of its parts. So this is that moment which I talked about, where you kind of pass through the arches and get to the kind of new gridded insertion. And it's where you kind of enter through the existing structure. The theatre creates this moment of transition, where a conversation where the old elevates the new, and vice versa. Where the theatre itself is kind of all about the idea of the black box. So you've kind of got hints of the grid and the red coming through from the exterior, but it's really about creating a blank canvas and giving kind of freedom to directors and producers of theatre production. And then it allows them to kind of create whatever they want, which can then be transferred to many different theatres. The theatre explores the idea of context through themes of decay, existing structure, and contrast. The mechanical grid does not imitate the railway's curves, but becomes the antithesis of them. And in the evening, the architecture transforms into a cultural beacon. Merchant Theatre does not simply act as a stage, but as a creative vessel. If the performance industry is to bounce back in a post-COVID world, design, technology, and innovation are the answer. That and some more great original productions made in Glasgow, as culture and aesthetics invariably go hand in hand. Certainly, theatre in the city is not dead. It will modernize and change and likely inspire new architecture. Diversification is the future, and that will require creativity and innovation. Thank you very much. That's me.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Jacob. Yeah, big
No
drink
problem,
of water after saying that.
Yeah, it's just verbal diarrhea, pretty much.
No, it was really enjoyable. That was so good. I thought it was like really advanced for this type of brief, because I remember doing something similar myself. I thought kind of just right through the project, there was like a lot of really nice moves you made. First, from even just like stripping away what was there and leaving that courtyard of arches, I thought that itself could have made like an interesting like theatre alone.
Yeah.
And then adding that and like contrasting it with like this different program was really good.
Thank you.
So you kind of, if you maybe go back to that internal image of the actual theatre itself.
Oh, this one, yeah.
Yeah, that one. I also want to say, yeah, if anyone wants to put a wee question in the chat, go ahead, guys, or the Q&A. Yeah, but I was wondering, like, what type of shows did you imagine taking place here? Is it kind of open to anything, or did you kind of want it to be like shows to be inspired by this type of building, or this
I hear
form? Yeah,
it's a great question. I mean, it's funny, like the original kind of influence, I was imagining a space where you could, that kind of grungy character where you could maybe watch like Train Spotting and see the theatrical. Because if you've ever been to the theatre and seen that, it's insane. Or something like A Clockwork Orange. And it kind of, the main idea was actually having the Arches itself as a series of smaller theatres where you'd kind of get that grungy aspect coming through. But I think the project just evolved, it changed from that. And it was something which I quite struggled with at the start because it was, I think, just being a third year and not really understanding stuff, is that I was trying to fit everything within the existing Arches. And it kind of takes a moment where you have to step back and think, okay, well, this is railway infrastructure. It's designed to be railway infrastructure, not for a theatre. So, it kind of goes on to your comment before, you have to make these big moves, which for this was carving out the interior. Because if you don't, then you're just left with arches, and trying to fit a theatre within a series of arches, I quickly found was a nightmare. So I guess I've got to, not really answering your question, but the original one was for that, but it kind of evolved into giving more kind of freedom to producers and to directors. And from doing research, it's what they want. Apparently you get directors and producers who get really narked by theatres which kind of dictates the type of show. So having this kind of blank canvas was really what I was going for.
Oh, nice. Just out of interest there, you just touched on that were you doing some speaking to theatre directors, or how did you like form that research?
I mean, I guess I would have loved to have spoken to theatre directors, but actually my partner's really into theatre. She does like shows and that, and we kind of interviewed her, and it's fascinating because once you start to understand the issues around theatre, so this was like one of the main issues she said was that actually toilets tend to be too close to the theatre, and this is backstage toilets, and it means that you can't flush the toilet during the show, otherwise the whole thing will hear about it. And I'm like, I never knew that, and I think that most architects probably won't go to the extent and find that out because it's just a massive hindrance. So it's small things that I kind of decided to get, but yeah, it's mainly from her, so shout out to her.
Yeah. No, I think that's really great. That's quite a lot of good advice you've given to any students that are in here as well, like from trying to get that inside scoop on on research and actually getting out there and asking people, and then also what you said about like making those main moves and really taking a step back when you're kind of going into a roadblock. I think that's like so important to periodically do, because it can just show you how the project can totally change direction and be so successful. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it kind of it's been such a learning curve, especially with kind of COVID as well. So trying to handle it all, but I would say I had a good month and a half just block, which was horrible. It was the worst thing, and then the big move was the thing which changed it, and it kind of exponentially progressed. But yeah,
it all seems easy after that one idea, doesn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
Great. Sure. Well, thanks a lot for that, Jacob.
No problem. Thank you.
Just going to be moving on. We're a bit tight for time.
It's okay.
Thanks a lot for that. That's so good. So next up, we have on the list. Yep, we're joined by Magda, fourth year at the School of Art. Oh, you're muted, Magda. Yeah.
We couldn't have gone without that. I'm just saying, hi everyone, and nice to virtually meet you and see. Let me just share. Here. So let me just read you some context for the thing from a project which was called A Theatre of Sudden Encounters, staying in the theme of theatres in the east of Glasgow. So the presence of art in our everyday life has diminished slowly over time and over centuries, with the functionalism and minimalism movements taking precedence, interfering, influencing the work and the produce we produce and how we dwell on an urban sea. Art in any form might take us by surprise when we see it in the sea or passing on the bus, and we lack that feeling of catharsis when we go and see art specifically. So for modern urban conditions often prevent us from experiencing art within daily lives. Only a narrow group of people purposely seek the presence of art. Meanwhile, its impact is often lost on the remaining majority. So what I want to see is how could we suddenly create encounters between maybe less affluent people that will not have money to go to a theatre or to go to an opera in their everyday life. So the project is located in Carlton in the Barras, which a lot of people kind of know and associate with the Barrowlands gig place. What I was looking for is creating a place that does not have a grand facade like many of the theatres and cultural places in the Glasgow city, and instead creating something that could serve its neighbourhood. So the population of Carlton is predominantly younger, working age, which walks to the city centre and is often located within kind of dilapidated buildings. It also is indexed as the neighbourhood within the bottom 10% of most deprived areas in Scotland. So we were wondering how is such a low density environment which people walk through to get to the work could serve to associate them with art in everyday life. Although the place is seemingly quite porous and an map, the accessibility of a space and the industrial character of the places often prevents us from walking through spaces. So how do we create that community from Barras into a theatre was what I was looking for. So originally I looked into the programme of the theatre and the main audition spaces, and then with their auxiliary functionals. So I was wondering how can we provide that interconnecting spaces that could encourage people to maybe bump into actors or bump into buskers and just go through this place at any time and just see what's going on as they walk into work. So the form of the place kind of took a massing of 5 clearly distinguishable forms interlaced by this timber lace of colonnade that opens up in a porous membrane to its environment and creates a beacon for the environment and for the whole neighbourhood to be proud of and to clearly distinguish it within the Barras Market area. So I'm so sorry that it seems to be the overall place was 5 clearly distinguishable form with a porous open street, inside outside kind of space which can be just walked through and experience anything live. Then we have a studio space and the main auditorium spaces kind of with the admin and the workshops and all the supporting elements of the theatre tucked away, but disconnected. So when people have to move around the theatre as a workplace, they could encounter people walking by from members of the public. And that kind of carries through for all the first and second floor. And then the auditorium itself is quite enclosed and private, being possibility for closing it off for a private event. As we know, theatre is a ticketed experience often, so the possibility of just closing it off was quite important, but it is laced by a timber colonnade which overlooks all of the rest of the building, and it kind of creates the transition where the main spaces are interlocked and you could have glimpses of it through tiny windows and see what's going on just as you're going to get a pair of jeans in the Barras, just to kind of spark that interest in people that are there by accident. So the facade of it is kind of programmed in the same way, where it was designed to be a solid timber element, but it has those peaks in and those battened windows which could allow us to look into the workshops or into admin offices to see what's interesting. It also created public spaces around in a courtyard which could bring the life of Barras and serve the local restaurants and pubs and as well. So the materiality inside is the same with the timber colonnade and timber foyer, which is clear accessible, and it has seating places and could serve as a gallery spaces as well, which could have exhibition art on its walls, with timber cladding all around, acting as a sound insulation. And then the whole structure was CLT, with timber cladding all around for both sustainable reasons and acoustic reasons to allow better acoustic qualities for both inside and outside. The insulation quality of the whole spaces were interesting, as obviously we could have an associated buzz and throughout of people next door to a quiet private screening of a show. So that was really important. And then in the end, the main space that was designed for the people of Calton was the main communal street, which has opportunities for busking, for people congregating, for local community members, renting that space, or maybe serving as communal stalls within that environment to kind of mix it all together into one timber building. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Magda. Thanks for that. Such an interesting project, and really liked the putting you after Jacob, just like a nice counterpoint of just showing the two different approaches, isn't it?
Yeah, something different.
Yeah, I really liked so Jacob's was like a literal train destination it seemed to get to, but I really liked your approach of that yours is a kind of like you pass through it. It's just a really part of the area that you kind of accept and you kind of go through. I thought that was just like really strong. Yeah, especially this image here just gives like such a nice atmosphere. How come you chose to go with so much wood, compared to the other industrial kind of buildings around it? Did you not like that kind of harshness to it, or?
There was a kind of consideration of a more stone or brick facades early on in the project, but kind of looking through both acoustic and sustainability reasons, I was wondering whether a question of is creating grand buildings that, yes, could be influenced by the context, but could be maybe a bit feared by the local people, maybe just seemed a bit closed. So timber as a kind of new almost form for theatres seemed quite reasonable to choose.
Yeah, I think it's like really successful here, because I think see if you go back to that kind of exterior render where you're like looking at it like up the street.
Is that the
yeah, that's the one. Yeah, I get the feeling that it does speak to those buildings around it, but it just gives it a bit of like a softer edge to it that I think is really nice. Was something like those kind of older theatres you see down in London, like the Globe or something like that? Was that something that you looked at, or?
Yeah, so I went through all of them, kind of looking at how theatres were formed and how they looked. And I actually had one of the crits early on in the project where someone told me, oh, this building looks almost too shabby to be a theatre. And I was like, maybe not shabby, but it doesn't look like a theatre. And I said, that's exactly what I wanted, because I don't want people to think, oh, that's a theatre, I won't go there. I wanted to just be a place for everyone, and kind of, it is timber, it stands out, but that was so people knew it's there. It wanted to be a statement in that area.
Totally, yeah. But I think you like navigated that quite well, because even when you see the image of the actual theatre space, yeah, it goes away from that usual kind of plush seating or that big red kind of curtain that you see. So I think it kind of modernizes it and makes it a lot more like accessible. I think it did a really great job. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we'll moving on. Thanks a lot for that, Magda.
Yeah.
Next up, we have, who have we got on the list? Year 2 at Strathclyde, Callum Grimes.
Hello. Hi. I managed to get my laptop to work.
Oh, ideal.
Yeah. Let me just check to see if this is working. Okay, perfect. So this was my second semester, second year project. It was to design a university library in St. Andrews for the University of St. Andrews. So we were given 3 sites across the city, and we were to inspect them and come to our own decision about which one we were going to design with. I chose the one in the top left corner, known as the Scores. So this is just a location plan of that. This site is like in the center of St. Andrews's campus. It's used as, it's actually, I discussed this in this slide. So going into it, the two main features that I wanted to try and tackle about this site was firstly, the amount of shadow that the site is cast in, because the two buildings to the south of the site are really tall. And especially during the darker months, the site is pretty much covered in shadow. And I knew that that would be a big issue going into the design phase. And also access, because this is like a big green space in the middle of St. Andrew's campus. And the only main access between all the buildings is this little pathway that runs across the southern perimeter of the site. And I just thought, if it's such a core piece of the university's infrastructure, I thought it'd be an opportunity to make it a more celebrated space for everyone. So looking at the town for inspiration, I noticed, obviously we couldn't go because of COVID, but I noticed that on Street View and on Google Maps, I noticed that there was a lot of alleyways and pens and almost like a secondary route of access throughout the whole town. And I wanted to try and add my own interpretation of that to my proposal. And then I also looked at the historical context, especially the gabled roofs and, oh, sorry, something just fell over. Wanted to abstract the roof forms to try and introduce more ways of natural light coming in to overcome that shadow issue that I discussed. This is one precedent that I looked at that I just kept coming back to over the whole project of a community centre in London, and the whole building environmentally can be taken apart and recycled. And I like the structure and the way that they have tried to bring in natural light as well. And the colours I kept coming back to it, so I used it as a precedent. So then going into the design phase, this was my initial party concept of public and private space. And then the way that in my design development, overcame the issues that I discussed beforehand, using computer rendering softwares and trying to experiment with introducing more forms. Like, as I discussed, I thought that the buildings were too tall to even get any light in the south facing windows, but this computer render taught me otherwise. And using like that kind of software to also inform my design process. And then my concept for the alleyway that I wanted to celebrate was the geometry of like books on a shelf, because I'm designing a library, and how that can be easily fabricated and just turning it into simple rectangles. And then if you push and pull on those shapes, you can get gardens and benches and start to build a space that people want to gather in. So this is my proposed roof plan. And then the concept about public and private that I was talking about in my party before was like, as you enter from the bottom left, sorry, the bottom left is the entrance. And then as you travel eastward, the privacy is maintained through the fact that it's like programmatically, all of the private stuff stays in this area of the building. And it means that the user can either make the journey to stay in this private element of the building, or they can go north and then they're greeted by like this big double height space and lots of books and lots of natural light. And it's like the contrast between public and private in the volume and in the floor plans. And then these were my proposal elevations as well. There's loads of trees on this elevation, so I just faded them out so you could actually see that. But this is how it would look from that green space that I wanted to try and retain for the public as well. And I had like this little penned area that, like this little overhang that I wanted to try and come up with a use for. So there's like some picnic benches where if students are getting too stressed or just want to get out of the library environment to eat some lunch or something, they can sit down outside next to like the nature and just chat with their friends. So that was my idea for using like that little, I don't know, like leftover area, I guess. This elevation is of the alleyway, and I tried to demonstrate like the transition from public to private in this elevation through the introduction of voids in the windows and how they like cascade down as you get to the entrance. This is a section cutting through the main library area. You can like see the almost like volume wise, it like raises as you enter to the apex of the building, the apex being like the main study spaces. And you can like see the amount of light that I tried to get in here to like embrace this public area. I know it's a library and everybody's meant to be quiet, but you know what I mean. And then in this section, trying to maintain that privacy by keeping everything on one floor and keeping the roof relatively flat. And it kind of the opposite is happening here, how it's going from public to private. With at the end here, we were asked to implement a residence as well, in case any academics wanted to stay the night. And then this is a section cutting through that residence, just a guy doing yoga. I quite like this because it shows how my proposal is nestled within the context. And then this is comparing my render with my precedent. And then this is the big render, I guess. And then this is the big exhibition space with the double height. And this is like what I imagined in my head as like you walk in and you turn the corner and it's like meant to be this place for learning. And then I think that's me.
Amazing, Callum. Thanks for that. That brings me back to my second year days when I did this project.
Oh, did you do it too?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, this is like such a scale back compared to everyone else's because they're talking about like all these abstract ideas and I'm like, I had to design a library.
No, well, actually, like there's a couple of reasons I wanted to include your project right after everyone else's or like in the same night is that kind of even though we're kind of going back to our kind of basics of how we form a building, you're still like looking at the environment and like making that be like so important to like how it's formed. Mm-hmm. So whereas like Tia's looking at like and Tia and Gabriella are looking at kind of infrastructure and like nature's like driving it. I mean, you still looked at like sun instead of water, you know, and that was like the important thing that shaped the building. It's like a really great thing that you've done here. It just shows the importance of that type of like site analysis as well. Yeah, so don't sell yourself short. Yeah. I wanted to say, yeah, can you go back to those sun studies?
Oh, okay, let me.
Yeah, they're quite far back, but I thought they were.
Here?
Oh no, I think it's the ones just after, the kind of 3D ones.
Oh, yeah, of course, sorry.
Yeah, we've got a question from Isaac saying, what was the software you used to generate these lighting angles and...
Oh yeah, so it's a rendering plugin to SketchUp called Enscape. I'd never used it before. This is the only time that I'd really used it, but they had a free educational license, so.
Yeah, that's like so useful. I think they even have like another setting and you actually see it in that kind of green and like as if it's like an infrared camera. One thing that, yeah, totally. One thing that I thought would have been really great for you to do as well is like see if you just had those studies and like kept carrying on with them to even like each space and just showing how your treatment to light in each different room or for someone just like picks up a book and reads by themselves or like the big spaces, I thought would be really interesting, like kind of really technical like thread to carry through the full project, but a really like great way of like tackling the issue in a library as well. You've done really well here.
Thank you.
Is anyone else got a question on submitting to the chat and we can ask Callum? Otherwise, what else I've written down here? Yeah, you mentioned that you weren't actually able to go onto the site.
Oh, yeah. Both of our projects in second year were based in St Andrews and we weren't allowed to go either time.
Oh God. That must have been so hard. What was the biggest challenge then that you kind of came across?
I think for this project, because I've never been before and I'd never been handed a site like of this scale, it was trying to understand like how big the building should be. And I spent like so much time in the early phases trying to figure out how big everything will be and like the scale in comparison to the context of like where everything needs to go. And I struggled with that to begin with, just because you can't go there. I can't.
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, it's such a hard thing to try do. I think you did really well just even using Google and those type of sun studies to do that site analysis. Yeah, and like touching on the vennels was like and the pens was a good thing to actually understand like what St Andrews is. No, that was great. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, if you want to say something, on you go.
Oh, so, no, I was just going to say, one thing that helped me out a lot was I watched YouTube videos of people walking around St Andrews.
Oh.
Because like you get like a good idea of like the atmosphere and even like the noises and stuff. Like it's a good way to understand the place when you can't go.
Oh, I've never thought of that. That yeah. Well, every like YouTube vlogger is you're like got a new avenue to like actually watch their videos now.
There's actually like a whole section of YouTube
thanks
dedicated.
For that, Cal.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
No, sorry, keep cutting yourself off. My internet's pretty bad here.
So is mine. I'm just, there's like a whole section of YouTube dedicated to like people on treadmills, and like they will like record themselves like walking around a town so that people like on treadmills can imagine themselves there. But it's sorry, I'm rambling. Thank you.
Ideal. Thanks so much for that, Cal. Last but not least, we can move on to our final speaker. We have Theodora Sideri from Strathclyde Year 1. Thanks a lot, Theodora.
Hi everyone, my name is Theodora and today I'm going to present you the first year project. So in the second semester, the object was to create a gallery space for local artists, and coming in touch with one of the artists through the conversation, we discussed the needs, and how this can be translated in the gallery space. So our unit focus is located in Govan, and more specifically in Govan Road between the Govan Underground and Elder Park. The brief is talking for a big gallery space, and I thought that the different spaces, they should have different orientations because of the needs. So looking another direction, the first one is looking the courtyard for more private and silent, and the other one is looking throughout the city. The courtyard can be accessed from the road, creating a community space. I was thinking to create an access route where the amphitheater leads the road to a public space. Sorry. So here we have the organization, how it started everything. I started looking on the site size and the brief that we have, and making some diagrams about the space and the uses that we need to put on the gallery space, and more looking on additional uses that might be needed. So for the floor plans are a diagram translated on based on the translated from the diagrams above. After a few trials, I chose the one that was working more, having an amphitheater on the ground floor with a panoramic view. On the first floor, keeping all the back of the house related to the staff in the ground floor. So we can see the transition from the ground floor to the first floor with a bigger stair, and from ground floor through moving on the gallery space with a smaller stair. So we have like a gallery space more protected, let's say. approaching from Govan Road to the gallery, you can see a large entrance with a solid volume on top, where is the gallery space, more protected from the noisy road. On the floor plans here, we can see the ground floor, where the part of the amphitheater is part of the bookshop. On the back of the stair are placed all the private uses for the staff. And as you can see, we have alongside direct connection to the courtyard. In the first floor is located the cafeteria, where we have a panoramic view on the courtyard and the amphitheater as well. The second floor is located the first gallery space, where, as you can see, we have a solid part on the south elevation and the openings throughout the courtyard. And meanwhile, in the third floor is more a transparent floor with a direct light from above and a workshop area and direct views overlooking the city. So in the next two slides, we can see the stair that leads in the gallery spaces, and shows as well the amphitheater with the rest of the gallery and the difference between the openings. So we have the solid and void parts on the facades. Here we have the axonometric, so you can see the relations and the transitions to the floors, the relation of yin and yang on the facades, and how this part is working like a plinth, where the volume of the gallery space is placed on top. One of the most important things in this project was the facade, and how are we going to marry our facade in our tenement block. So I've done a few studies in a few examples to understand the relationship between the solid and void in a few local buildings like Alexander Greek Thompson, and one international example, which is a more randomness facade. So moving on, my south elevation, as we said, we have a shop front entrance, and as you can see, the datums are followed from the neighbor buildings, while the chamfer of the infill panels, they can control the light that is coming in the gallery space. And finally, the north facade, as we said, is the yang in this relationship, and that has access to the courtyard. That's from me, thank you.
Oh, can you hear me all right? Yeah, am I coming through?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that was great, Theodora. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
That's so great for a first year. Yeah, I was pretty shocked seeing some of these images and drawings that you're doing already. Yeah, you should be really proud of this project.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say if there's any other questions in the chat, last chance for our last speaker. Do you mind just going, oh, sorry, can you keep your screen up? That was wanted to ask one, if you can go back to those facade studies. I thought they were like so great.
These ones?
Yeah, ideal. Yeah. I think this is that's such a great exercise to do. Just for any project, I think really good looking at kind of important examples around Glasgow and seeing what you can take. Did you learn anything about these particular architects as you were drawing over their facades? Any kind of rules or?
Yeah, I was trying to understand more why they did those kind of openings and why they chose it through different projects.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, because in the first two is the same architect with completely different facade, let's say.
Yeah, Greek Thompson is definitely one that people just don't really think about as much compared to Macintosh, but he's just like total master of facades. I think it's totally worth anyone on the video to kind of check out more in more detail. So how did that like translate directly to your facade then? I know you've got if you go maybe onto an image of the facade, that'd be good.
This one?
Yeah. So for the proportions that you took, like where did you take them from?
So I've tried to keep the first, let's say, the first part more solid because they needed like a dark room for videos and photographs. So I took the idea to keep it like solid, completely solid with no openings on that one. And try to make the rest of the spaces that they need more direct light. So keeping it more like lightly and more opening.
Amazing. Yeah. I think like some of the renders you were doing there really sold that idea really well. And even just getting that kind of main volume over that open glass frontage was really successful. So well done. I wanted we kind of went over quite a bit over time. So I think I'm gonna wrap that up here. I want to say thanks so much again to Doors Open Day and all the speakers that took part tonight, and thanks to everyone that came along tonight. And hopefully we'll see you next year. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.